the key part of this, Al, is that desal is not the only solution. So the city's done a fantastic job with surface water.
Yeah.
We're going to get desal. We need groundwater, and we need reuse. Those are really the four legs on the stool that are going to keep us with water security, and it's going to help our community thrive, and it's going to help our business climate. So people who have businesses here have that water security, and hopefully it attracts, and not hopefully, it will attract new businesses and people who want to move to our region.
Welcome to United We Podcast, the official podcast of the United Corpus Christi Chamber of Commerce, the only chamber podcast in South Texas. I'm your host, Arreola Jr., and we're here to explore the latest business insights, community stories, and opportunities shaping the coastal bend. Whether you're a business owner or just passionate about our region, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Once again, welcome back, Chamber family and friends, to United We Podcast. Today we are joined by Drew Molly, COO of CCW, Corpus Christi Water. Drew, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Al, thanks for having me on. It's always good to have a little bit of time to talk water, so happy to be here.
Oh, because you're not busy talking water almost every day. No, thank you for coming. And before we do talk water, the nuts and bolts of your job, I wanted the folks, our members and the audience, to get to know you a little bit better. I know, like I said, you're always making the rounds. You're making your best case, our best case for what our water future is going to look like. And I know those conversations are challenging. Sometimes they're political. But I wanted to give you an opportunity, or us, the audience, to get to know Drew as a person too, if you will. So, Drew, basics is where are you from originally?
Yeah, so I grew up outside of Detroit, Michigan. My parents were school teachers, and so I grew up in Detroit. My parents decided to go overseas. They wanted to teach abroad. So I spent most of my young life living overseas. So I was in Saudi Arabia. I didn't know it at the time, but I lived in Jeddah, and I found out later that I was drinking desal water in Jeddah back in the 80s.
I was going to go over there.
So maybe that's why I'm a big advocate for desal. It goes all the way back to my younger days. I didn't even know it. And then I graduated from high school in Jakarta, Indonesia.
Oh, my God, interesting.
And then I ended up going to college at Texas A&M University, where I met a lovely gal from South Texas. She grew up in Sandia, and so we lived in Houston for a number of years, raised our kids there. And then about 2.5 years ago, my wife had an opportunity to relocate back to where she grew up in Sandia. And so she said, I think the bus is going to head south from Houston. You want to get on it? And I said, well, heck yeah, I want to get on it.
Was it going to leave without you?
I'm worried it might have left without me. So I said, I need to get on that bus. She works for a large financial company. My wife does. And so she was able to make that work. For me, water is obviously what I've been in for my entire career. And so the opportunity was presented itself to do some water down here in this part of the world. I love it down here. We used to come down here. We would always come down to South Texas to celebrate Easter, Christmas, all those different holidays. Her parents still live here. So when the opportunity arose to move down here, it was like, man, this is a great opportunity to do that.
Well, look, you brought up your I guess your pathway, and it's very interesting. I mean, I would love to. We could probably have a full podcast on just your experiences overseas growing up, but certainly I would assume that's giving you kind of a full breadth of education, if you will, like a really balanced perspective on the way the world works in many ways, I'm assuming.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I realized, because I spent most of my years as a young kid overseas, was that the one thing you couldn't do when you lived in Saudi Arabia or Indonesia was you didn't drink the tap water. And I always knew I was home in the United States when I would get back to Michigan in the summers, because teachers have summers off. So we would come home and spend our summers in the United States and Michigan. I knew I was home when I could open up. It sounds kind of corny, you could open up the tap and you could drink the water. I knew that I was back in a place where water was important and it was safe to drink. And so when I went off to college, I always knew I wanted to go into something engineering related, something that would help me solve problems. And so engineering was the right fit for me, and I ended up going into environmental civil engineering. And, frankly, that career path has enabled me to do things that I really have a passion for.
Well, and what your work is incredibly important and very interesting. It's fascinating stuff. You're sharing how you kind of got into the lens of water and why water has become your career. I'm assuming you worked in Houston area, yeah?
I did. So I ran one of the largest drinking water departments in the country. The city of Houston is a massive place. And so I spent about 16 years in Houston running the drinking water department, actually kind of moving up through my career in the drinking water department. And I ended up running the drinking water department towards the end of my career there in Houston. I also had a number of years working in the private sector. So I worked for a consultant company based out of Westchester, Pennsylvania. I did that for about 7 years, and then moved over into local government, city of Houston.
Um, we're grateful to have your experience and now here in Corpus Christi. Certainly, a lot of challenges have been at our front doorstep regarding the drought and looking for options that could be drought resilient. This chamber's position over the course of this past decade has been all of the above. Let's go, bring more, bring more, bring more. It seems like we have a lot more legs right now where we are where we wanted to be with respect to the Inner Harbor project, starting to really see that momentum start really taking shape. I know we're excited about it. I also want to thank you for your partnership in engaging the chamber and educating us and what this is going to start to look like. Specifically, engaging me in the Carlsbad trip, where I was able to see that facility in San Diego, and this is where I want to take that conversation. That facility was impressive, and there was maybe the same challenges that we're seeing here on our doorstep that seem more political than they do policy, right? Or based in information, misinformation. They certainly had those challenges getting theirs online. But when I saw their discharge area compared to our discharge area and little things that I'm kind of doing the math thinking, well, ours looks like a lot better of a scenario than the scenario that they were able to make happen. I guess you described the San Diego plant, what was innovative about that at its time, and certainly the political challenges that one faced.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I think most people will say, and we heard that expressed in San Diego, and if we can get a trip to Florida to talk to the Tampa Bay folks, I think you'll hear the same message, which is the first one is the hardest one. It's really difficult to do something that has not been done before.
Right.
And so Texas is looking to our region as being an entity that can figure out how to solve problems. And so it has been a big challenge, and there's been a lot of really great debate on what route do we need to go. And we've had this debate for more than 10 years. And so it's exciting to see the fact that our region now has a fully permitted, fully funded with state funding through the Texas Water Development Board. And so these are things that are, momentum building. I think the other thing that's important is working with folks like in Carlsbad and having them share some of their lessons learned. Because, there's always things that you can do better the next time you do it.
Right.
And I'm a huge believer of that. And so talking to people who have done this before, sharing some of their experiences and incorporating some of those lessons learned into our projects, I think are an absolute must. And I think at the end of the day, our community expects that. They deserve that. And we recognize that.
No, and I think we're lucky, right, that there are these opportunities to learn from others where maybe those shortfalls that we won't maybe experience any. Certainly there might be challenges, but at least we won't have those, right? Right. Well, look, you brought up the Middle East and you brought up desal. I know that they have been in this space for decades, like you said, even since like the 80s, and they've, to your point, one got going and they only kept going from there. And it's effectively if they didn't have it, they don't have anything, right? I mean,
they wouldn't survive.
Right.
If you go to the Middle East, and Israel is a great example of this. If you go to Israel, which I have not had the good fortune of going to Israel, but I've lived in Saudi Arabia and I've traveled extensively around the Middle East. Israel is an example of a country where they have actually they have water independence. In fact, they're so water independent that they actually sell water to countries that don't have those benefits of having that kind of desal infrastructure installed. And so, I think what some people don't realize is that desalination is something that's been around for decades. There's over 13,000 seawater desal plants around the world. In fact, internationally, if the plant is not bigger than 50 million gallons a day, it's actually considered small. So you will see as you go to Israel and Saudi Arabia and countries around, and they tend to be in arid climates. The Australia is another place where there's lots of desalination plants. But they are facilities that have worked well, and they provide that, I'm just going to say it, drought-proof water supply in areas that, frankly, in Carlsbad, they get 8 inches of rain a year.
Right.
We get about 28. And so they're even more arid than we are. But I think the key part of this, Al, is that desal is not the only solution. One of the things that we've heard from Carlsbad and Tampa Bay is that we need multiple sources of water. So the city's done a fantastic job with surface water.
Yeah.
We're going to get desal. We need groundwater,
Hmm.
and we need reuse. Those are really the four legs on the stool that are going to keep us with water security, and it's going to help our community thrive, and it's going to help our business climate. So people who have businesses here have that water security, and hopefully it attracts, and not hopefully, it will. It will attract new businesses and people who want to move to our region.
Well, and we can all do our part. And you brought up reuse. I've also seen some cities that, especially if it's a challenge that we know is at our doorstep, where maybe we need to step up in our own respect, like urinals that maybe don't require as much water when you flush, and things that are a little bit more design innovation that certainly would carry some kind of cost to a business. And I certainly wouldn't say I want to go there to mandate it and put an ordinance together, but certainly too it could ultimately, if a business is being smart about their bottom line, there are opportunities to save where they can, and also save the water, so to speak, right?
Right. One thing I will tell you is in my short time here in the city of Corpus Christi, the community here is about as conscientious as it gets when it comes to water, and I know that because I've seen Houston,
Hmm.
and we don't want to emulate Houston. A lot of times we talk about the seven larger cities.
Sure.
There's some things that are great, and there's some things you just don't want to emulate.
Yeah.
And water in Houston, they leak water out of their drinking water system like you wouldn't believe.
I was going to go there. Yeah.
They have on backlog right now. They have about 2,500 water main breaks that are leaking right now. We have zero. They average about 30 breaks a day. We average 0 to 1 breaks a day, one maybe two. But the conscientiousness that our community has, they have no tolerance for water just
Seeping out, right? Yeah.
seeping out of the ground and going down to a storm drain.
Right, right.
In Houston, I like to pick on my friends in Houston. I still have family there, so I don't want to be too critical of Houston. But in Houston, you can have a water leak just kind of leaking down the street for a couple weeks, and you may get a phone call, but it's just a different mindset.
Yeah.
And I think we should be proud of the fact that our community cares deeply about water, and they have incredible stewardship when it comes to that.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Houston and the differences between us and them. Certainly at the state level, this was a big conversation. Water, 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 water. Everybody was talking about water. And again, thank you for bringing up Houston. Every community was looking at water a little differently, like what that meant to them. I think we certainly had some big wins this session. You guys working through the process and permitting too, those wins and the financing wins. Right now it does seem like it's not necessarily just on our shoulders that this water burden is just, oh, we're going at this completely alone. It looks like there are willing partners, willing agencies like at the state level, hopefully maybe even federal conversations too, you think?
Absolutely. So we're talking to our U.S. representatives that represent us in Washington D.C. We're talking to our legislative delegation. You just hit the nail on the head, Al. It was an extremely successful legislative session in Austin for us. Our state legislative delegation did a great job.
Yeah.
Our state representative Denise Villalobos, she's a freshman. What a tremendous job she did as a first time state rep. When you put that package together and you look at what she was able to do with her colleagues, Chairman Hunter, and you have our, J.M. Lozano and Adam Hinojosa and State Senator Chuy Hinojosa, that team right there really represented our region well.
Really did.
Because at the end of the day, we were able to get some state funding that is going to help us take some of the burden off our ratepayer. And our ratepayer, that's our number one mission is to minimize impact to our ratepayer. And with the successes that our legislative delegation had in this last session, we were able to get some funding to help us take some of those pressures off our ratepayers.
And yes, very exciting wins, and very big thank you to our delegation. And to your point, they worked collaboratively. They really honed in on our messaging and brought home the butter, so to speak, brought home the
Yes.
bread. Yeah. Drew, Inner Harbor plant, chambers all in. Continue to hope that we can push that needle forward. Timelines are what they are in this modern age. I've compared some of these conversations where you're hearing concerns on cost. The reality of the world since COVID, the past 5 years, everything's gone up. I mean, 50%, 75%, 100%. Right now, the global markets are completely unpredictable. And,
Hmm.
so I want to say where I guess I'm going with this. I do want to thank y'all for being forthright and as transparent as you possibly can in the moment. But the reality is, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Right.
And but I do know that what is happening today is we're still in a restrictive water environment that we need tomorrow to change that. And so I don't want to say what I'm sounding like at this point is at whatever it costs, but I mean, I think we are in that scenario that let's really figure it out, and the economics are reality, and let's be fair about the world where we are today, right? I mean,
Well, so let me say a couple things about that because the Inner Harbor project is got a lot of momentum. It's got a lot of momentum because it's fully permitted and it has a lot of really good state funding at lower interest rates. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to have an impact to the ratepayer.
sure.
And so when you put the fact that there's going to be a cost associated with Inner Harbor, and then you add that cost to all the other infrastructure that needs to be taken care of in our entire drinking water and wastewater system, there's a lot of upward pressure on our ratepayer over the next 4 or 5 years. I will say that we're not alone. Every other city in Texas and across the United States is dealing with this.
Yeah.
So what we need is we need to be very clear to our ratepayer of what our expected cost increase are going to be over the next 4 or 5 years. I think the ratepayers are smart, our community's smart. They know that costs are going up. We don't like costs going up.
Right.
But one of the things that we also did was we're looking at how does the cost increase for this project at the Inner Harbor compare to some of the other transformational projects that we've done in our historical past. One project, for example, just, most people have heard of the Mary Roads Pipeline. Wasn't the most popular project at the time. Thank goodness it got done.
Right.
The Mary Roads Pipeline, there were two aspects of that project, and each project at phase had a 25% increase to the ratepayer, about a 25% increase. And so when we're looking at the costs of this project for the Inner Harbor, our estimate right now is it's about a 25% increase to the ratepayer. So if you pay $40 a month, which is what the average resident pays, you're looking at about a $10 increase. That's what our estimates are right now. But you said it. The longer it takes to get projects delivered, the more costs are going to go up. So it's imperative that we have that determination to execute these projects quickly with good quality and workmanship. I think we've got an excellent contractor. When we went to Carlsbad, we saw that workmanship. Pretty nice plant. Kiewit built it. Kiewit's the same team that's doing the Inner Harbor project. They know schedule. They're probably one of the best companies in America when it comes to large infrastructure projects. They know how to deliver projects. So I think we've got all the parts, all the components in this project that are going to make it truly successful, and it'll be transformative. And I would like to say that my hope is that people look to this project as a example for how other projects should be emulated.
And I do think they will. I think you guys are innovating. Certainly, this is the first one in the state, right?
Yes.
And the first, most recent one in the country for a
So
while.
it's the second. It would be the second largest desal plant in the United States, and it's the first municipal desal plant in Texas.
Yeah, there you go. Well, Drew, we're kind of hitting the minute mark, and so if there are any parting words you want to share with the audience, I know you guys are working. Thank you for your time today because I know you're incredibly busy. So, but yeah.
Well, Al, I'll just say this. I appreciate you having me on. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. And I will say, I think the key message for us is that we are working tirelessly. We've got over 500 people every day that are doing what they need to do to make sure everybody has safe drinking water and wastewater services. And so we're not stopping at desal. We know that this drought is pretty rough. And so we're doing a lot right now to make sure that we don't have any additional drought restrictions that we can't have that. And so our mission is to avoid any additional drought restrictions that would be put upon our community, our residents, our business community. That is what we're trying to avoid. We know that the desal ticket is going to be here in June of 28, but June of 28 is still a couple years away. And so what are we going to do to get to that date? And we're working to make sure that we have water from other sources.
Well, yeah, no, Drew, and I know this drought literally has y'all on the front lines literally every single day. And so thank you for your hard work and dedication to your entire team, to everybody at City Hall. I also want to thank our audience for joining us. We'll see you again next time.